First of all, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me. It's a tremendous honor to be here. And having taken care of people with diabetes now for almost 30 years, maybe I can share with you, as I know we have some school children listening, and something I once overheard my son say. So we have a microscope at home, and my son's friend saw this microscope sitting on the desk and asked, "What is this?" And my son's response was, "It's a microscope." The son's friend said, "Well, why is there a microscope here?" And my son said, "Well, my dad does diabetes research." And so this friend was impressed and said, "Well, that's great." And my son said, "No, but I don't think he's very good at it." And so I was listening. I was in the kitchen cooking. I was kind of a bit taken aback by this. The friend said, "Well, why not?" And he said, "Well, he's been doing it for years, and diabetes seems to be just as much of a problem as it always was, as far as I can tell." And actually, from the mouths of babes, I thought, wow, he's right. And the exciting thing, I think, right now is that we truly do have some progress that we haven't had for many years in the field of diabetes research. So I'm going to start by showing you a slide that has a part of an email extracted that arrived to me yesterday. And since I have the privilege of working at UCLA and with a great research group, I have many and publications through that group. And through these days, through the internet, people find you. And this is a typical email that I extracted some of that arrived just yesterday. Our daughter Delaney was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes last Sunday. My wife and I are still in shock, denial, and everything else. Delaney is 6 years old and went from being terrified of needles one day to having 6 shots per day and 10 finger pokes for the rest of her life. This is simply a tragedy. I probably get 1 or 2 emails along these lines every week. And so I can assure you that no one is more motivated with this 30-year accretion of the tragedy of diabetes for so many families to improve their situation. I don't know how this pointer works. If it does, if anybody from... No? Between the yellow lines. Okay. There we go. Thank you very much. So let me first of all, to set the stage, very briefly tell you about how the system, the glucose metabolism, is supposed to work, since I know we have people listening in who are not medically or scientifically trained. Glucose is a fuel that our brain needs. And so the blood sugar is very tightly regulated. And even when you're asleep at night and you haven't eaten for maybe 10 hours, your blood sugar remains very constant because your liver, shown here, releases sugar into the blood, the glucose, at a rate that matches the rate that you're taking glucose out of the circulation. So the question then is, how does the liver know how much glucose to put into the blood? And the answer is, this is where the pancreas comes in. The pancreas, shown here, reads or measures the amount of glucose in the circulation and releases insulin every 4 minutes in little squirts into the circulation. And this insulin works on the liver and it constrains the rate that the sugar is released. So it damps it down. And this is the normal situation. So when you eat your breakfast, you have more glucose arrive into the circulation. And the glucose levels rise, insulin is released, it damps down how much new glucose is put into the blood and balances for the glucose that's just been entered the blood from the meal. So it's a feedback system, very much like your thermostat at home, regulating, for example, if you have your air conditioning, regulating the temperature of the air. So the important part for our interest today is the pancreas, shown diagrammatically here. And part of the problem about diabetes is that the pancreas, this large organ here, is very inaccessible. It's very inconvenient because it's at the back of your abdomen, right behind all of the structures within your abdomen. And 99% of this big organ that's about the size of your hand is actually involved in making digestive juices that go into the bowel to digest your food here as it passes through. And there are 1 million little tiny groups of cells in the pancreas named islets of Langerhans after the German medical student who found them. And these islets are about 2,000 to 3,000 cells each Each of these little purple structures here is a single cell that makes the hormone insulin and releases it into the blood circulation in response to the circulating glucose. So this is an islet from a person who doesn't have diabetes and has about the right number of beta cells, the type of cells that make insulin within it. In contrast, if I now show you islets from someone who's just developed type 1 diabetes and someone who's had type 1 diabetes for a longer period of time, you can tell that there's less of these purple cells and less still and less still. So what's happening is these cells that make insulin are being destroyed, and they're being destroyed because unfortunately the person has an immune system that has mistaken them for a foreign and is making these cells that are shown in red here that are attacking the cells that make insulin shown in green here. This is again from a human pancreas, and these red cells are killing off the cells that make insulin. So unfortunately there's an error, and slowly over the course of years, typically several years, these cells are taken away and destroyed. And as a consequence then, instead of having this system in place to regulate the blood glucose, the insulin secretion disappears, and now the liver just makes tremendous amounts of sugar, and the glucose level rises in the blood. So that is the thing that has gone wrong. So let us return to our new diabetic Delaney, age 6, and let's go through what would have happened if she developed diabetes at different times. Had she developed diabetes in 1920, she would have died within a year of diagnosis. She wouldn't have made her 8th birthday. And the discovery of insulin in the 1920s was truly one of the great medical miracles, because now, after that, she would have received insulin obtained from pancreases from the slaughterhouse, from pigs, and she would have received insulin and she would have lived. But when I went to medical school, the consequences would have been that she would have still died very young. She probably would have become blind, most likely lost her limbs, had developed kidney failure. She would have been told it was too dangerous for her to have pregnancy and would have been sterilized when young. So this was, at the time I went to medical school, truly a horrific disease. Now, at 2008, where Delaney has this, things have improved tremendously. Her life expectancy is almost normal, according to the CDC, as long as she has appropriate care and she's able to follow that care. The complications are much less common. She should have normal pregnancies if she wants, with no difference to people who don't have diabetes. So with all that, why does it matter? My neighbor, my neighbor in La Cañada has a 6-year-old son. He pointed out to me with his little calculator that he is going to have 250,000 shots if he lives his normal life expectancy. So yes, things are better, but this is not normal. This is truly, thank you so much, this is really a disease that is still very intrusive in lifestyle. Any of you who are fathers or mothers, imagining your little girl or son requiring 250,000 shots just to remain at school with the other kids. So now this is the structure that we're missing. In order to reverse this disease, this is what we have to replace. And so the challenge is, how can we replace it? Very briefly, what I'll tell you about is where these cells come from. This graph shows you the numbers of beta cells versus age in humans, and it shows that normally we grow our beta cells at a tremendously fast rate between birth and the age of teenage life. So by the age of 5, we've pretty much got the number of beta cells we're going to have as an adult. And this is interesting because many of you know that people often develop type 1 diabetes when they're teenagers, at this kind of age here, when they're growing very, very fast. And if you go back to this diagram, they're no longer growing the numbers of beta cells anymore. So it's perhaps not surprising that there's an increased risk of diabetes at that age. The way the beta cells grow is shortly after birth, there's a very high rate of replication, of division of those existing beta cells. And then this drops off, so by the time you reach 5, you're not making very many more beta cells through replicating existing beta cells anymore. Dr. Beishi is going to show you that when he makes embryonic stem cells into beta cells from human embryo studies, these beta cells undergo a transition from high rate of replication, shown in red here, down to this rate of replication, very closely mirroring what we see in humans. And this is very encouraging because it suggests that these cells not only have the capacity to expand in number in the same way as adult humans, but also that they have the intelligence to stop dividing and becoming mature cells, which reduces their risk of becoming malignant as time goes on. During adult life, the circumstance where we most commonly try to increase the number of beta cells we have is if we get overweight, as shown in this picture here. And if you look at the numbers of beta cells, or the collective number of beta cells in people who are lean versus people who are overweight, we do see that adults do have a capacity to increase the number of beta cells they have. So that means that although the replication of beta cells disappears during adult life, there is some means to increase the numbers of beta cells. But a caution here, most of the science that is pursuing this is being done in mice. And let me show you the same data here in humans, again, on the same scale as what happens in mice that are obese. And you'll see there's a tremendous capacity for making new beta cells in mice that is much, much less in humans. And so I think one of the big cautions is that just because we can cure diabetes in mice through beta cell regeneration does not necessarily mean the same strategy is going to work in humans. It's a caution we have to be very careful of. So where do beta cells come from? As I said, during childhood, there's this period of rapid beta cell replication, which Dr. Beishi's embryonic stem cells also are capable of, balanced by loss of beta cells. But in fact, we think that there are other sources of beta cells, stem cells within the pancreas, that also contribute once you reach adult life. And these become a source of great interest to us, I think, for beta cell regeneration in people with diabetes. We've recently undertaken studies to measure these, which I won't give you great details of, other than to simply show you that monkeys here are very similar to humans when they don't have diabetes. This is a human with type 1 diabetes with reduced numbers of beta cells. This is a monkey with reduced numbers of beta cells because we have given it a toxin, streptozotocin. And we have studied these monkeys where we've biopsied the pancreas over time to look at the dynamics of beta cell formation and loss. And when we do that, looking at this little bathtub system again, in adult monkeys like humans, there is ongoing beta cell turnover. They're making new beta cells, both from replication of existing cells, relatively few, and other sources of beta cells. And this is being balanced by ongoing loss of beta cells. So that, in other words, this system isn't static. Just like we make new skin cells, we make new hair cells, we are making new beta cells continuously to replace the ones that are eventually dying off. And after making these monkeys diabetic, the process continues, but in fact we have to be careful, because if you'll note, the numbers of new beta cells coming into the system has decreased. So yes, there's a capacity for regeneration, but the capacity seems to decrease as a consequence of the diabetes. So that it would be important to understand why these stem cells are less effective at replacing the beta cell mass in the context of diabetes, and that's an important area of investigation. The other strategy is to say, let's make beta cells from somewhere else and fill up the bathtub. And I think that is essentially something we need to push to, because Delaney and her 250,000 shots lined up is not willing or interested in having that many injections. And I think with Dr. Beishi's presentation, like to Dr. Prieto, I actually believe now that this is truly an option that we can reach. So I'm going to throw out this slide to end on here to say that in 1920, Delaney would have died within a year of diagnosis of type 1 diabetes. Discovery of insulin was a medical miracle. I believe that in the year 20, 10, 11, 12, I've already challenged Ed that this should be 10 here. There will be the first implanted human embryonic stem cells derived from islets. derived islets, and this truly will be the next medical miracle. And I have to say I'm very proud as a Californian taxpayer and a Californian voter that I can look on at what I believe is going to be one of the greatest accomplishments in medicine, and I will be a big cheerleader for you guys because I believe you collectively are going to do this. I have a patient here, and I promised Joelle that I won't retire until this has been accomplished. This is a picture of how us Brits partake of retirement. So you can come and see me, Joelle, clad in the usual British bikini here. But I hope that I don't have to wait too long for this. And I'm sure that you will have pleasure in coming to visit me without needing to bring your glucose meter with you. So I thank you very much. And I think I now hand over to Ed.